皆さんこんにちは、ケニーです。上級スピーキング講座基礎編1へようこそ。今日のテーマはですね、ストーリーテリングです。今日の内容、キーポイントを申し上げますと、今日は皆さん、私にとっても皆さんにとっても1回目ですね。ですので、自己紹介をしていただきたいと思います。お互いにちょっと知り合うことでですね、これからより親密なね、関係が築けるんじゃないかと思っておりますので、ぜひよろしくお願いしたいと思います。ストーリーを使って自己紹介をするというね、ポイントが一つ。それからこのストーリーテリングというものがね、いかにビジネスプレゼンテーションと深い関わりがあるかということを理解していただきます。それから今日私がですね、自分の人生について起きたこと一つ、これはちょっとプライベートなことですけどね、これを使ってストーリーテリングのデモをしてみたいと思います。それから皆さん、このストーリーテリングはですね、有名なスティーブ・ジョブズがよく使うテクニックなんですね。で、彼がなぜこれほど人気のあるスピーカーになったかという、その秘密の一つがですね、彼のストーリーテリングにあったんですね。こういったことを皆さんにご理解いただきたいと思います。はい。それではですね、このストーリーテリングなんですけれども、皆さん、ストーリーテリングというとなんかビジネスプレゼンテーションとかけ離れてるんじゃないかというふうに思われるかもしれませんが、実はそうじゃないんです。最近はですね、いかにこのビジネスプレゼンテーションの中に人を引きつけるストーリーを織り込むか、これがですね、勝敗を分けてるんですね。例えば皆さん、TED って聞いたことあります？見ますよね。はい、TED。これは何の略ですか？テクノロジー、エデュケーション、デザイン、この略なんですね。もともと TED というのは、このテック関係のコンピューター関係の人たちがですね、そのハイテクに関する難しい内容、ビッグデータですとか AI ですとかね、ロボティクスですとか、そういったことをね、シェアし合おうと思って始めたグループなんですね。で、彼らはどんなプレゼンテーションのスタイルをとってますか？どこかの大学の教授みたいに数式をホワイトボードに書きながらやってるでしょうか？違いますよね。彼らが使っている方法はよく見ていただきますと、実は全てストーリーテリングです。いかにその複雑なね、話を魅力的なストーリーに置き換えて話すか。これをやってるんですね。それからもう一つの例を出しましょう。この本はね、日本でしばらく前にベストセラーになった本ですね。で、今、スタンフォードビジネススクールでどんな授業が一番人気があるか、学生たちの要求が高いかということを調べた本なんです。で、この表紙見てください。一番最初にですね、ストーリーが来てますよね。ですから、このビジネススクールの学生たちは卒業した時にですね、起業家になる人が多いんですよね。で、資金が必要になります。その時に起業家たちにいかに魅力的なストーリーを語れるかでお金が集まるかどうか決まっちゃうんですね。ということで、ストーリーっていうものはこのビジネスに深く関わっているということがお分かりになったでしょうか？はい。それじゃあですね、ストーリーの構成ですね。ストーリーの構成というのは私のデモビデオ、一番最初皆さんにご紹介した紹介ビデオのところでも言いましたけれども、この V 字型になっているケースが多いんですね。つまり、その人生が暗転してしまう、穴に落ちてしまうわけですね。そうすることで聞き手の共感が得られるわけです。でもそれだけで終わってしまったらですね、価値がないですね。大変でしたねで終わっちゃうわけですね。そこからどういう価値のある教訓を学んできたのか、要点する部分ですね。これも入ってきて価値のあるストーリーになります。で、最初はね、シンボルで入るね。そのストーリーを表す一言シンボルで入って、次がストーリー。で、最後にSo whatですね。何を学んだか。この形をぜひ皆さんにしっかりと今日ね、掴んでマスターしていただきたいんですね。よろしいですか？それじゃあ私のデモに入りたいと思います。私の前回のデモテープはですね、仕事上の失敗ということでしたね。ゴールドマンサックスをね、解雇されてしまった話をデモとしてしましたけど、今回はですね、よりパーソナルな話を使ってやってみたいと思います。ちょっと英語でね、ここからやってみたいと思います。The symbol of my story is the broken heart. Okay? When you hear the broken heart, what kind of associations or image do you have? Yes, normally, it's a broken love. My broken heart has a different meaning. Okay? Now let me tell you my story. About 10 years ago, I was teaching presentation skills in front of 30 people in the morning. And all of a sudden, I started to feel a strange pain on my heart, which I have never experienced. And the pain grew stronger and stronger, and I couldn't stand it any longer. And I collapsed on the floor. One of my participants called an ambulance and I was rushed to the nearby hospital. The doctor diagnosed me and he said, "Oh no, you're having a heart attack. 心筋梗塞. You need operation right away." So I was immediately ushered into the operation room and I was lying on the operation table and the doctor started to insert a long needle-like needle into from my right hand wrist into the vein. And on my operation table, there was the screen, and the doctor was watching that screen, and he was inserting that needle. It's called a catheter. This is the device they used. And I didn't lose my consciousness, so I was watching the whole operation. My heart was hurting so much, I was worrying that I was going to die, but I could see the whole process. And what the doctor did was he led the needle all the way into my heart. And, this is a heart. And let me explain what happens when we have a heart attack. There's 3 major veins like this. And because of the cholesterol, it's blocked. So that's why he inserted the long needle and let the tip of the needle reach the blocked part and use the balloon. At the end of the needle, there's a balloon attached to it like this. And using air pressure, he blow it up so that it can open that blocked part physically. And I remember that his words telling his assistants, 10気圧10秒, something like that. And at that moment, air comes in and the balloon blew up like that. Okay? And after that, the balloon shrinks and he pulled out the needle. And there is a metal called a stent like this. So stent stays as it is. And I have 2 stents in my heart. So fortunately, operation was successful. The day after the operation, I was hospitalized, of course, and the doctor came to my bed and he showed this material. "Mr. Kawasaki, your heart 2 parts was blocked. Now it's open by the stent." Okay? And he also showed this picture. This is a picture of my heart before and after. You see the left-hand side, you don't see clear veins because, upper part of that vein is blocked. After the operation, that blocked part was open and the blood came back. So this is my heartbreaking experience, not the love-related incident. So this is my story. So what did I learn from this? What I learned from this is life can be very fragile. We all believe we can live up to 70 or 80, lucky 100 years old because longevity is getting longer. But the lesson I learned is, who knows, right? Because of the accident, because of the disease, our lives may be taken away all of a sudden. So the lesson I learned is, life is not 5 years later. Life is right now. Just capture this moment, capture today, because life is today, life is this moment. Precious life. That's the lesson I learned. Thank you very much. はい、こんな感じでね、やらせていただきました。よろしいでしょうか？そうしますと、今私がやったことは何かというと、テーマですね。素材は自分の人生で起きた辛い体験、怖かった体験ですよね。死にかけた体験です。はい。それで、その構成ですけれども、どういうふうに構成したかというと、シンボル、ストーリー、ソー、ファットですね。で、これはさっきお見せした V 字型になってました。こういう V 字型ですね。シンボルで、ストーリー、ソー、ファットという形で展開してきたわけですね。で、その話し方、これ味付けの部分ですけれども、料理でいうところの味付けの部分ですけれども、気持ちを込めてですね、熱意と誠意を込めて話しました。Okay, so this is a way you should tell stories. こんな感じでですね、皆さん、今日はですね、皆さん自身にストーリーを考えていただきます。はい、よろしいでしょうか。それでですね、皆さん、もう一つ今日はね、おまけがあります。それは何かと言いますと、先ほど申し上げたスティーブですね、スティーブ・ジョブズ。スティーブ・ジョブズはこれまたね、ストーリーテリングがものすごいうまいんですね。ですので、彼のね、スピーチをご覧いただきます。おそらくこのスピーチね、 もうご覧になった方が多いと思うんですけどね、スタンフォード大学でのこのスピーチです。で、彼のスピーチの素晴らしいところ、ね、これから見ていただきますけども、注目していただきたいのはですね、まずストーリー、内容に注目してください。本当に素晴らしい内容ですね。それからもう一つはストラクチャーですね、構成に注目していただきたいと思います。まず内容に関してはね、ストーリーを語る時のコツ申し上げますね。一つはね、3つの要素が必要になります。一つはね、どういうビジュアルな要素があったかですね。どういう場面を彼は語っているのか。私のさっきのサンプルでも目に浮かぶ場面をね、皆さんに申し上げました。その自分の横にモニターがあってですね、そこにそれを見ていると心臓の中に針が入っていくような、ね、イメージですとか、それをですね、画像とともにお見せしたわけですね。ですから大事なのは、どういう目に浮かぶシーンを彼は語っているのか、ビジュアルイメージですね。それから2つ目の要素はですね、オーディオなんです。オーディオ。耳に聞こえる要素ですね。耳に聞こえる要素。これは対話。誰かとの対話が入っていたかどうか。で、3つ目の要素はですね、フィーリングです。どういう感じを彼は感じていたのかですね。皆さんもストーリーを語るときはこの3つの要素を入れてください。まずビジュアルイメージ。2つ目はオーディオですね。3つ目はこのハート、フィーリングを入れてください。そうしますとね、文字通りストーリーが浮かび、立ち上がってきます。3D になってくるんですね。もう一回繰り返しますよ。まず目ですね。目の要素。2つ目耳の要素。3つ目ハートの要素をぜひ入れていただきたいと思います。それからね、今回3つの話が語られるんですね。3つの話の構成にね、注目してくださいね。もう最初にもう種明かしをしてしまいますとね、最初の話は、最初の言葉は connecting the dot という言葉で入ってきます。よろしいでしょうか。それがね、キーワード、あるいはシンボルですね、一種のね。それからストーリーが語られて、話の締めはですね、Believe your dot will be connected to the better future dot。点はつながっていくと信じてやっていってくれ。こういうメッセージで終わるんですね。内容はね、どういうことなのかじっくり聞いてみてください。それからですね、2番目のストーリーは、V 字型ではなくてですね、実は N 字型で彼は話をしていきます。どういうことでしょうか。それはですね、一番最初、下から始まるんですね。成功していないところから始まっていきます。で、キーワードはね、love and loss という言葉で入ってきます。それで、すごく成功して頂点まで一旦上り詰めるんですけど、そこからまたバーンと暗転しちゃうんですね。で、ボトムまで行って、それで戻ってくるという、そういう話。で、最後の言葉は、love what you do, if not, keep looking。こういう言葉で締めています。N 字型なんですね。はい。それからね、最後の3つ目の話は、これは V 字型でお話ししてくれます。彼はね。で、その最初の言葉はですね、death という非常に重い言葉から入ってきますね。で、ストーリーが語られて、その体験をね、通り抜けた後に待っていた彼の学び。Follow your heart. Everything else is secondary. こういう話でね、展開されていきますから、ぜひこのストラクチャーに注目してみてくださいね。はい。で、彼のこのスピーチですね、私はもう何十回、もう何百回かもしれませんね、見てます。なぜかというと、これはそのストーリーテリングのお手本であるということが一つ。で、もう一つの理由はですね、この内容、もう何回聞いても私は感動するんですね。それからすごくね、元気づけられるんです。ですから皆さんもね、彼のスピーチをこの内容に本当にフォーカスしていただいて、この彼の言ってることが自分の人生にね、どのように応用できるのかということも考えながらね、聞いていただけると非常にいいと思います。はい。それじゃあね、彼のスピーチをここで流しますので、今から12、3分ですね、彼の話に集中してみてください。内容とストラクチャーですね。ストーリーとストラクチャー、注目してくださいね。はい。じゃあ始めます。
Since its founding 114 years ago. And we are pleased to have him here today. Please join me in warmly welcoming this year's commencement speaker, Steve Jobs. Thank you. I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today,
I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why did I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a waiting list, got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college. But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working-class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all of the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference. My second story is about love and loss. I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me. I met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, and I returned to Apple, and the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Lorene and I have a wonderful family together. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love. And that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life. And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking. Don't settle. My third story is about death. When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, "If you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right." It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. I didn't even know what a pancreas was. The doctors told me this was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months. My doctor advised me to go home and get my affairs in order, which is doctor's code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids everything. You thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes. I lived with that diagnosis all day. Later that evening, I had a biopsy where they stuck an endoscope down my throat, through my stomach and into my intestines, put a needle into my pancreas and got a few cells from the tumor. I was sedated, but my wife, who was there, told me that when they viewed the cells under a microscope, the doctors started crying because it turned out to be a very rare form of pancreatic cancer that is curable with surgery. I had the surgery, and thankfully, I'm fine now. This was the closest I've been to facing death, and I hope it's the closest I get for a few more decades. Having lived through it, I can now say this to you with a bit more certainty than when death was a useful but purely intellectual concept. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now, the new is you. But someday, not too long from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away. Sorry to be so dramatic, but it's quite true. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. When I was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of my generation. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand, not far from here in Menlo Park, and he brought it to life with his poetic touch. This was in the late 60s, before personal computers and desktop publishing, so it was all made with typewriters, scissors, and Polaroid cameras. It was sort of like Google in paperback form 35 years before Google came along. It was idealistic, overflowing with neat tools and great notions. Stuart and his team put out several issues of the Whole Earth Catalog, and then, when it had run its course, they put out a final issue. It was the mid-1970s, and I was your age. On the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself. And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.
はい、いかがだったですか？皆さん、彼のスピーチ、ご覧になっていただきまして、聞いていただきましてね。まず内容いかがだったですか？内容。素晴らしい内容でしたよね。で、それぞれの内容に共通するのは、目に訴える要素と、耳に聞こえてくる要素と、ハートの要素。これが入っていたってことに気がつきましたか？例えばね、最初の話、大学をドロップアウトしてですね、毎週何マイルも歩いて、ハリー・クリシュナの教会に行ったと。その時に美味しいものを食べたみたいなね。なんかこう、目に浮かんできますよね。あるいは3つ目の話ですけれども、その、癌の宣告を受けた時に、その、レントゲンの写真を見た時にですね、彼の膵臓ですね。膵臓に影が映っていたみたいなね。そんな話が出てましたよね。それから、オーディオなんですけれども、オーディオの要素。これは特に、皆さん印象に残っていると思いますけど、 3つ目のストーリーのドクターのお話ですね。ドクターが身辺整理をしろと、いうことを言われたと。その言葉ですね。それがこう耳に残ってないでしょうか。それからこのハートということに関してはどういう感情を彼が持ったかですね。特に2番目の話を思い出してください。もう絶望したと。でどうしていいか分かんなくなっちゃったと。シリコンバレーから逃げようと思ったみたいなね。絶望の気持ち、がありましたし、それからでもそれでめげたんではなくてですね、その自分がコンピューター、テクノロジーを本当に愛しているということが分かってみたいなハートに訴える話が入ってましたね。3つ目の話にもこのハートの要素がすごく入っていたと思います。はい、それからですね、3つの話、ストラクチャー注目していただきましたが、最初の話は V 字型、2番目の話は N 字型ですね。で3つ目の話は V 字型だったと思います。この、V、N、V の形でね、入っていたと思います。で、皆さん、私ね、この、頭文字、この V の字型でストーリーを語ることをですね、これをビクトリーストーリーって呼びたいんですね。なぜかというと、穴に落っこっちゃうんだけれども、でもこう、リバウンドしてくるわけですね。で、そこからすごい貴重な学びを得て、勝利をつかむわけですね。ですからこれはビクトリーストーリーと私は呼びたいと思います。それからね、N 字型は一旦穴に落っこって、また成功して、また落ちちゃうんですけど、すみません。下から始まるんですね。下から始まって成功して、落ちて、また戻ってくると。この形ですね。ですから諦めないということですよね。落とされても諦めないということで、Never Give Up Story というふうに呼びたいと思います。この2つの VN の形がね、入っていたことを、しっかりと心に刻みつけておいてください。素晴らしいスピーチでしたよね。で、なぜ彼のスピーチが素晴らしいのか、その内容の面から、それからストラクチャーの面からご理解いただけましたでしょうか。はい。それでですね、今日はですね、皆さんにこのストーリー、というものをね、次回のズーム、1回目のズームでですね、全員に向かって語れるように準備してきていただきたいんです。それで、皆さんにお願いしたいのはですね、2種類のストーリーを作ってきていただきたいと思っております。それは何かというと、最初のストーリーはですね、プライベートなことに関して一つストーリー、人生で記憶に残っている失敗した経験ですとかね、辛かった経験をぜひ一つ選んできてください。それからもう一つはね、仕事上の体験です。仕事上の体験での失敗ですとか辛い体験をね、3分以内で英語でスピーチをしてきていただけるように準備してきていただきたいというふうに思っております。はい、よろしいですか？はい、これがね、課題になります。それでは、I'm looking forward to seeing you in the first Zoom session. Until then, live with passion.